This afternoon, BioWare wrapped up their final Anthem livestream of 2018. We will see the fine folks at BioWare in 2019 with just a couple months till we go hands-on with Anthem for ourselves. It's going to be very exciting the next few months, no doubt about that. But today's livestream was all about Interceptor point of view gameplay in a brand new stronghold called Temple of the Scar, which, as you can guess, was a Scar temple full of Scar-related scrapper style aesthetic things. It was all pretty cool. We got a lot of new information, a lot of new details, but I also dissected a lot of the Stronghold gameplay, so we're going to be talking about that. I've got a few criticisms I'd like to toss towards the developers' feedback. I don't really call them criticisms, more like feedback, things that just stood out to me as like, hey, that's kind of janky, so maybe we could put that on the radar if it already isn't. I think, though, we should probably start by talking about the Interceptor and the gameplay and the information we saw and got, because I know a lot of you right now, you're sitting there, just clicked on this video, give me the Interceptor footage, Tony. You're chomping at the bit, so stop chomping at the bit, whatever that even means, and let's get into the Interceptor details. Now, Mike Gamble was piloting the Interceptor today. He was assisted by John Warner rocking the Storm and Ben Irving rocking the Colossus. Ben was set up for tanking, close quarters. He had a shot coil, a heavy missile, and he was doing plenty of taunting to aggro those enemies, take the damage, take the tension off of his teammates so they could focus on doing the damage while he was focusing on doing the tanking. John was running a primer loadout, which allowed him to set up for additional combos with his teammates. And Mike's Interceptor was rocking a sort of close quarters kind of burst damage, in my opinion, loadout with some additional dots or damage over time. So he had some kunai or some throwing glaives, whatever they're deciding to call them. He had a fancy double shot shotgun. He had a poison grenade as well as a debuff ability. And he was also running a component that allowed him to automatically reload his primary weapon every time he performed a triple dash. So basically he was rewarded for going fast. I'm a sucker for any sort of exotic perk or any ability that allows me to automatically reload weapons while I'm being mobile. So it was cool to see that there. It's a component that makes a lot of sense for the Interceptor. And I gotta say, the most impressive thing about the Interceptor for me wasn't really like, oh, it's got all these crazy melee abilities. I mean, that's cool too, and we'll talk about that in a second. But it was the animations, the level of actual acrobatics the Interceptor performs through these beautifully silky smooth animations every time it does just about anything. I mean, look at this thing bouncing off the walls. Look at its regular jump, its double jump. When it jumps into the air and begins to initiate flight, it does a backflip before it engages its thrusters and takes off into flight. It all looks really, really cool. This thing is obviously extremely nimble, and I could see how you could find yourself crashing into a wall very quickly, but at the same time, I could see the reward of really mastering the movement abilities and the speed of this javelin and getting really good at diving in, hitting a couple melee blasts, nail him with a shotgun, fly back, couple kunais to the face, and then maybe leave the rest for your team to come and clean up because you got more targets to go harass. It all looked really fantastic. We did get some new details on the melee and the way it works though. So we know with the ultimate, you can basically melee infinitely. You can just keep initiating combo after combo, and it does a really large amount of damage. However, when you're out of ultimate, you will have to deal with a small cooldown before you can actually activate those melee combos. To counter for that, some of the recent debuffs they've made in their latest build, they've ensured that you get a stun lock with your melee on low tier mobs. So every time you go ahead and smack out a melee on like a trash mob, not some crazy elite with a shield, but a regular standard mob, you'll get a quick stun on them. You can then use that yourself to initiate an additional attack. Maybe you whack him with the shotgun, hit him with the kunai. Maybe you just want to throw a poison grenade and then get out of dodge. Or your team can come in, set up a primer or a detonator and help you initiate a combo on that target. I think it's just going to be a great tool to just say, hey, I don't really want to deal with you right now, so take a stun lock and see ya. And then you can kind of just jet out of there and go deal with a different target while someone else swoops in to clean up your mess. Or however you want to handle it. Player choice, right? That's what these sorts of games are all about. So yeah, the Interceptor looks really cool. I think a lot of people who already had a taste of it from some of the small gameplay demonstrations we got for the different abilities are going to be really stoked with what they saw here today. I like the idea that while it is this melee-focused class, and melee looks very viable, you know, you could do a lot of fun stuff here. You don't have to run like a shotgun just because you melee people a lot. I'd be content with running a scout or a precision rifle plinking off targets, and then using that mobility to constantly relocate, so I'm not getting hit by Scar turrets or other Scar snipers. And then occasionally I'll dash in. I'll throw down a poison grenade. I'll start to set a bunch of these guys up with debuffs so my team can do additional damage, and I'll get back out and I'll snipe a little bit more. Huge opportunities across all of the javelins to really build those personalized loadouts. That's the thing that continues to excite me the most about Anthem each and every time I see it. That's about it for the Interceptor, though. So if you don't care about strongholds and some of the other details that we got during the stream, you can go ahead and have a really great holiday. For the rest of us, let's move on and take a deep dive into the Temple of the Scar Stronghold. It's a Scar temple. BioWare doing the full-on boop with the on-the-nose naming ideology there once again. In this case, they were running this stronghold with 3 players, but they have confirmed that you will need 4 players in your team, the full 4 to run strongholds. You're either going to be playing with friends or matchmaking or a combination of both. Here's the thing I have to say about that. If there is any way, as they showcase today, in which they can just let players run it however they want, whether it's solo or with 2 players or with 3 players, not just requiring 4 players, not forcing matchmaking all the time, I think they should do that. Because I think there is a huge opportunity for that just player difficulty personalization, if you will, right? Being able to go in with maybe my brother or my good friend and say, hey, you know what, we've been running Grandmaster 3. We're on the hardest difficulty in this game now, dude. We got some seriously good gear. Why don't we go back and run some of our favorite strongholds, like the Temple of the Scar, and see what difficulty we could accomplish it on with just 2 of us while we're both running the Interceptor. That ability for the player to make up their own challenges. You could still do that with your group of 4 when you matchmake, but I think there's just more freedom to letting players do it how they see fit. Again, whether it's solo, whether it's duos, whether it's with 3 people, mixing and matching, stacking certain javelins, using certain weapons, not using certain abilities. I think this is the type of game where people are going to want to do that. It's the sort of thing you see people do in Diablo and in Monster Hunter. People like that freedom. I just don't see a need to limit it unless it's a core part of their design ideology where they were just like, we can't possibly have people run any of these strongholds with less than 4 players. But they ran it with 3, so again, I just think it's something they should reconsider, because I think it opens up a lot of additional options for replayability, especially for the more hardcore audience that's going to sink a serious amount of time into the game as soon as it goes live. That's all I got to say on that. Let's move on and talk about the rest of the Stronghold. Now, they were playing on normal difficulty. They were level 20, which John Warner said is about 3/4 of the way through the critical path, which is like the main storytelling portion of the experience. And, this was a Scar temple. It had a lot of the Scar aesthetic, obviously. Just scrapper bits all over the place. We see, walkways built up with old metal and wood pieces. It was also very claustrophobic. This was actually a very confined space. And that's one of the reasons they didn't call their strongholds dungeons, is because they're not all dungeons. Some of them are outdoor, some of them are in more open spaces, some of them are going to be a combination of both. But in this particular case, this was a very claustrophobic, very confined environment. There was still all of that verticality, there was still a lot of height in the world. That's something that the game is just doing pretty much everywhere you look at this point, I believe. But I liked that. I liked that it was more confined. I liked that it was like, yes, you can still fly. There's plenty of room to fly in here. There's just not as much as you might like. So it's going to be a little bit more challenging. So when you're getting shot at and there's a Scar Elite with the shield and there's 6 turrets up and there's a Scar Sniper all the way up in the scaffolding somewhere, you really got to look at where you're flying and not just bounce off of the walls left and right. I like that. It's an additional difficulty modifier that kind of gives the Temple of Scar as a stronghold its own personality. Oh, that's that one that's like all indoors, guys. It's super confined and claustrophobic. I hate that one. Oh, I love that one. It's so much fun, Stuff like that is really important, especially considering the strongholds themselves don't appear to be too complex in terms of gameplay mechanics. This is, I think, something that a lot of people are going to start to recognize. Something I've already realized with Anthem is that this is a game, at the end of the day, that focuses very heavily on its core gameplay experience, which revolves around its mobility mechanics, its combo system, its team play experience through that combo system, through playing with your friends, playing with randoms in a squad, and its gunplay. This is a game all about the action, which is why I really don't like seeing people try and draw comparisons to Destiny, because I just don't think it's anything like Destiny. If you want to say, here's why it's not like Destiny, great, because I think Anthem is not at all like Destiny and a lot more like Diablo. This is very much a Diablo style experience. It is a third person mobility-focused Diablo for all intensive purposes, where you're going to be running through 6 different difficulty levels. There's a global loot table where you're just going to be playing on the harder difficulties to get better loot. And it's a game that's like, hey, if you like the core, if you like shooting stuff in our game, if you like our combo system, if you like our flight system, if you like the different javelins, then sink your teeth in, because we've got some good, deep content here and a lot of ways for you to build out your player from an RPG perspective. I really don't see them being obsessive with like layers of mechanics and, you know, puzzle solving. Even when they showcase some of the aspirational content, as they're calling it, that's going to be coming post-launch and outside of the Strongholds and Legendary contracts, I can't see them going like super nuts with puzzle solving or crazy mechanics like that. I would love to see more flight-focused stuff, and I think that's something that makes a lot of sense for the game, but I'm not at all surprised that the Strongholds are more simplified in terms of mechanics and infinitely more focused on the core combat loop. So that's at least the case with this Stronghold. So why don't we actually talk about how the Stronghold itself played out? Now, we didn't get to see it all the way to the end. We didn't get to see the boss, but it basically worked like this. They entered into the Stronghold, which was the Scar Temple. They started dealing with the first wave of a Scar ambush. At that point, the Scar enabled an alarm that started calling in reinforcements. They got an objective that required them to eliminate those alarms. They then were forced to clear out the Scar nest. This is a design decision that I really appreciate. You can't just run past enemies in this game. It's not about that. This ain't Destiny. You ain't running strikes. You're not going to just boop your way all the way to the end and then whisper the worm stack the boss and kill him in 3 seconds. This is a game that might let you kill the boss in 3 seconds if you get really good, but wants you to deal with all of the damage, all of the enemy on the way to the said boss. So having that requirement, in my opinion, is awesome. You know, if this is a game that I end up really enjoying, where I'm like, yes, I love this core gameplay loop, I don't want to run past anything. I want to shoot stuff with my friends. I want to shoot stuff with randoms even. I want to have a good time blasting people and building combos with my Colossus with a bunch of people I barely know, rather than just running past everything with a bunch of people I barely know. That's not fun. You don't go to a go-kart track and then just pick up the go-kart and then carry it to the finish line while everybody else races around the track. That's boring as hell. I want to race the race. So I like to see that. Moving on from that, though, they eventually went through a couple other waves. They started, sort of exploring the Scar Nest, which I like that there were opportunities to kind of just look around and, experience the design of the actual Stronghold itself. They were then hit with another objective. This was the first time that we got to see a sort of player handicap introduced, where they had to carry fuel cells, which restricted their ability to fly. So they actually had to stay on the ground. They could use their jumps and their dashes, but they couldn't fly. They had to carry the fuel cells to power a generator. We got another situation like that later on where they had to plant explosives on a gate. Again, it limited their ability to fly. I think this is just a nice little difficulty modifier. I like these sort of mid-mission handicaps. If there's one piece of feedback I would have, though, it's that the physical indicator that says, hey, you're carrying an item, it's this little carrying case on your hip, and it's not very bright in color. Its design isn't that noticeable. And there's a lot of stuff happening in Anthem sometimes. I mean, there's just crap blowing up all over the place. There's a lot of really bright explosions, a lot of particle effects. I could see when you're really in the thick of it, just kind of losing track of items like that. So I wouldn't mind them just sort of bringing that carrying case out a little bit more, making it more noticeable when the poop is really hitting the fan. Now, outside of that, we saw a couple other environmental hazards. There was one point when they had jumped down into the sewers where they weren't standing in water. And I kept thinking to myself, why don't they just jump in the water and cool off? And then everybody realized, myself, Ben Irving, John Warner, and Mike Gamble, that they were standing in acid. So I like seeing those sorts of environmental hazards. It was sort of the floor is acid for a moment. And the Scars also consistently employ anti-air turrets. So you kind of got to see, I think, a fair range of enemy types here and direct combat challenges that are going to be at least in a Scar Stronghold. Things might get a little bit more spicier when we start talking about Dominion-related content. Maybe there's a Dominion-style Stronghold. We haven't necessarily seen everything the game has to throw at us in that department, but that was a Stronghold. I'm excited to see how the bosses play out. We've seen the Swarm Tyrant to some extent, and I really like the way that boss fight looks, so I'm curious how a Scar Stronghold would play out in terms of bosses. What do the Scars have to throw at us outside of those big guys with the shields? Do they have something bigger and badder? I want to know, but it looks like we'll have to wait to launch to figure that out for ourselves. All in all, again, not heavily mechanic focused, but very focused on the core gameplay loop, and I'm actually really into that. I love my raids in Destiny. I love the puzzle solving and, you know, the platforming in Destiny. But I also equally love a game that just says to me, sink your teeth into the core, make a bunch of crazy builds, and see how much stuff you can kill and just how quickly you can kill it. Also, you can fly. So, yeah, that's the way Anthem is doing things. Maybe that works for you, maybe that doesn't, but I think it's nice to now have a much better understanding for what you can expect from Anthem's gameplay experience. I think this is going to put a lot of people into the light where they were previously kind of in the dark about just what the hell they'd be doing in Anthem. While we still don't know everything there is to know for the game, I think we can at least at this point, you know, define the overall Anthem experience. Whether it's, you know, looking at the builds, looking at cosmetics, and now looking at, you know, where the gameplay loop is going to function and exist across these different gameplay modes, like Strongholds, Legendary Contracts, and again, whatever else they decide to throw at us with their additional aspirational content post-launch. Now, there's a few other small details they threw at us that I did want to run through. First and foremost is this wonderful tweak to dialogue when you do subsequent playthroughs of Strongholds. So since you're going to be doing these Strongholds on all the different difficulty levels, the game tunes back the dialogue so you don't have to listen to the same full-blown dialogue you listened to the first time you ran the Stronghold. One of those small details that goes a long way. Thank you on that one, BioWare. Now, Strongholds and other missions also have a medal system. It's basically a challenge system that gives you a set of challenges that come in 3 difficulty flavors, bronze, silver, and gold, every time you enter a mission like a Stronghold. It might be kill this style of enemy this number of times, or maybe kill this number of enemies with this weapon or this ability. When you complete those, you're going to get bonus XP, and you actually get shared XP gains when you play in a group. So again, more reason to play with other people, whether it's your friends or a group of randoms, not just in Stronghold, but across all of the content available in the game. We also got to see a very brief look at something called Alliance Tiers. I'm hoping this is sort of a squad style system like we get in Monster Hunter World. I love that I can just jump into my squad when I join up in Monster Hunter World, and then if my buddy gets on 20 minutes after me or 20 minutes before me, we can just join that squad. It makes matchmaking a lot easier. I would love to see something like that with these alliances inside of Anthem, and then if we can actually rank up our alliance through many tiers, that would be cool, but maybe this has nothing to do with player clans. We'll have to find out in the future on that one. The last thing I did want to touch on, and we already kind of talked about the Strongholds, is that they're doing a global loot pool. Okay, so the way that works is that there's just one big loot table that exists across the entire game. In order to get better gear, you're going to want to play higher level content. This is basically the same way Diablo handles their loot tables. That means that there will not be Stronghold-specific loot rewards. I was kind of hoping for that, if I'm completely honest. I really like the idea of going in and tackling, you know, the Scar Stronghold and getting a Scar-styled weapon. But I also understand that there's a lot of freedom for the player that comes from letting people run whatever content they want to run to gain access to the best weapons in the game just by playing on a harder difficulty. I just think there's room for both of those things. I think there's room for that player freedom that comes with an open global loot table, and there's room to say, hey, by the way, if you guys complete the Temple of the Scar, you know, on this difficulty level, there's a good chance that that loot table is going to give you this Scar-specific reward that only drops inside of the Temple of the Scar. It's something they seem pretty set on, and I can understand why they didn't go that route. I imagine it's a lot more work making specific rewards for every single piece of content you've done in the game. But if it's something in the future where they can start to layer that stuff into additional Strongholds or even add it to old Strongholds, I would definitely be happy. I don't think it's a negative to have those things in any way. I think it would definitely be a plus. But again, I can understand why they didn't do it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, though. How much does that stuff matter to you? Or are you just A-okay with the global loot table and the freedom that comes with it? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. There's definitely a few other discussions I want to have in relation to Anthem versus other games like it. I think we could do a whole video on drawing, I think, more accurate, more fair comparisons to games like Destiny and Diablo and Monster Hunter World that could maybe help further define for people the type of experience that they can expect to get in Anthem. Again, even though we don't have all of the information, we have enough information at this point with Anthem where you can pretty clearly see what sort of a game Anthem is going to be. I'd like to talk about that and again, maybe help people better understand that so they can either get more excited about Anthem or realize that it's simply not a game for them. I'm going to go ahead and bounce. I hope you guys all have an incredible holiday. I will see you in a few days. We're going to be doing some stuff before the new year, so I'll catch you before 2019 rolls its way in. Like the storm that it is, with Anthem just land like a month. It's like a month and a couple days into 2019. It's going to be spicy, guys. I'm really excited. I hope you are. Thank you all so much for watching. And hey, you know, like I always say, remember to be awesome to one another, because maybe one day you'll be just teleported to some crazy universe where there's these things called scars. You don't really know what they are. They're kind of creepy, but they don't like you and they don't like your friends. And now you got to fight your way through this place called the Temple of the Scar. What kind of a name is that? It's crazy, right? You better hope at that point that you've got their back as much as they've got your back.